Welcome to Healthy Conversations, sharing the knowledge, experience, stories, and the wisdom of herbalists and other natural healers. With your host, Stephen Horn. Today's guest, David Winston. Hi, and welcome once again to Healthy Conversations. And again, I have joining me David Winston, a founding member of the American Herbalist Guild, founder of Herbalist and Alchemist, and an amazing herbalist. And I really appreciate all you've done for our field, David. It's a joy to be with you today.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be with you. And I have to tell you, Stephen, when I started studying herbal medicine 55 years ago, I fell in love. And I have to tell you, it's been the enduring passion of my life. I fell in love with plants. I fell in love with herbs. I fell in love with the idea or the actuality. I could walk out my door and there were medicinal plants and edible plants and plants with economic uses. I mean, to me, it was the most amazing thing in the world. And of course, when people would say to me, they say, "What do you do?" And I say, "I'm an herbalist." And people would look at me like I just told them I was an alien from another planet. It was like me telling them, "Oh, I'm learning to deliver ice for your ice box or light the gas lamps at night." People would look at me and go, "Isn't that something people did 100 years ago?" But I fell in love. To me, it was the weirdest thing was that more people weren't interested. I remember in my first 2-year herb studies program, I had 2 students, and I was so excited that anybody wanted to learn about this. I must admit, we have a whole lot more than that now, but the idea that anybody wanted to learn about this, it was just so much not part of the conversation, and it was so foreign to most people unless they came from, unless they were of Native American background or Hispanic or African American or rural, or they came or maybe came from another country. There it wasn't such a odd thing, but mainstream America, it had ceased to exist. And so it, to me, it has been, I've been doing this, as I said, quite a long time, and it's been my vocation and my avocation. It's my passion. And so for me, it's just been a pleasure. And I feel so blessed that I've been able to spend my whole life doing what I am passionate about.
Yeah, well, I got passionate about in my teens when I was actually working in scouting, got interested in outdoor survival and nature, and I all these plants that the natives had used for medicine and food. And one day we ran into a patch of stinging nettle, and I harvested it, cooked it, and we ate it.
Uh,
And I actually thought it tasted pretty good, like beet greens or spinach or something. Little butter and lemon juice. It was terrific. And I remember sitting and thinking, I just ate a wild plant. Like, like I just, I mean, it just became a fascination for me. And I would, spend hours going out where, well, everybody else was doing other things. I've got this field guide. What is this one? What is this one? What is this one? What is it for? So I agree with your passion. But we were talking earlier about vision for herbalism, and I mentioned that I say to people, herbs have become popular, but our understanding of herbal medicine has not been. And we need to get that understanding out there. And part of that is energetics. So you want to explain to people a little bit about what energetics is? Because I think if you want to be a good herbalist, you need to study energetics.
right. Well, I agree with you. So energetics, there's numerous terms here. You could talk about energetics, you could talk about qualities, you could talk about, in Chinese it's called the show, the personality. And energetics, a lot of times when people hear the word energetics, they think of some type that we're talking about some kind of woo-woo psychic thing. That's not what I mean. That's not what's meant in Chinese medicine at all. I'm not saying, well, first of all, I'm not saying it is actually woo-woo. The fact that plants have a consciousness, and that's a whole nother thing, but that's I'm not saying that's not real and something that we can deal with. In the concept of the energetics we're talking about, we are talking about the quality of the plant, what it does in your body. So we're not talking about the medical classification. We're not saying, it's a diaphoretic, it's a nervine or nervine if you're from the UK, or an emmenagogue. What we are talking about, does the plant have a heating effect on the body? I.e., is it warming or heating? Is it cooling? Is it moistening? Is it drying? Is it deeply nourishing? And so every plant has some mixture of these qualities. All right. And that, so if you have, let's talk about the lungs. This is a really good example. In Chinese medicine, the lungs are called the tender organ because they're open to the outside environment. And so they're easily affected by dryness. So it's wintertime now. So many of us, or most of us, have the heat on in our homes. And you notice that there's this door somewhere in your house. Almost everybody has one where in the summertime the door sticks and you can't fully close it. But once the heat comes on in the winter, the door closes easily. If the moisture, or in this case, lack thereof, if the lack of moisture in the air can take a solid door that's probably painted or varnished or whatever and cause it to swell enough or shrink enough that it changes how well the door can close, what do you think it's doing to that tender tissue in your lungs? So in the wintertime, we tend to get a lot of problems with dryness, which I highly recommend people get a good humidifier in their home for their bedroom. It'll help actually reduce the number of respiratory tract infections you have. So, herbs that are moistening are appropriate. In this case, we're talking about the lungs, but we're not just talking about the lungs in the sense of energetics, but in this instance, we're talking about the lungs. Herbs that are moistening help to give a moistening quality to the lungs. Now, I remember this was a really interesting thing. People would say, well, drink slippery elm tea. It's moistening and it'll help moisten your lungs if you have like dry mucus. And I thought about that and I thought, well, wait a minute, you're drinking this tea, it's not getting into your lungs. If it did, you'd have fluid in your lungs. That would be terrible. And it took me years to understand how this actually worked. And it's actually because when you have when you are a neonate, there is tissue that has an basically genetic similarity. And so, as these moistening herbs pass over the mucous membranes of your mouth and throat and then into your stomach, all right, they obviously don't go into your lungs, but it causes a reflex action on the similar tissue that is in the lungs. Anyway, so with lung conditions, and this is a real simplified way of doing this, but with lung conditions, as I said, the Chinese call them a tender organ. And so it's really easy. If you have somebody with a chronic, not even a chronic, an acute lung condition, and you treat it incorrectly, you can make it worse. And so when people, I always like it when people give somebody something and it gets worse, they go, oh, well, it's just a healing crisis or you're eliminating. No, actually, you didn't know what you were doing and you just made it worse. So if somebody has profuse mucus, that's dampness. If the mucus is profuse and yellow, green, or bloody, that's damp heat. If the mucus is profuse and clear or white, that's cold damp. If the mucus is dry, sticky, hard to expectorate, it's the kind of mucus when it finally comes up, you can like stick a picture on the wall with this stuff. That's dryness. And if it's clear or white, it's cold dry. And if it is yellow, green, or bloody, it is hot dry. And so what we try to do is we match up herbs. So if we have a cold, dry condition, we are mostly, not entirely, because we don't want to. One of my early teachers, Dr. Eng, used to say, remember, yin becomes yang and yang becomes yin. And when he said it, I just shook my head and go, oh, of course. I had no idea. What he meant is if you have something that's this extreme over here and you just give the exact opposite and you push it to the other side, you don't actually make it better. We're trying to bring people back to balance, back to their sort of,
That's the key of energetics, is trying to understand the concept of balance,
mhm,
finding the appropriate balance.
right.
That's what it's taught me, is to how to figure out where is the balance.
Exactly.
Because you can have, like, okay, in our first interview we talked about the old herb books. So you have cough, and in that is listed slippery elm and lobelia and wild cherry bark,
Horehound and
horehound, whatever. Okay, and you can try one of those, right? And maybe it'll work, maybe it won't work, but all of those have different qualities in terms of heating, cooling, moistening, drying, that those basic
exactly.
things. And so you're going to have a whole lot better results if you can look at and say, well, what is the condition of the lungs, and
Exactly.
what kind of remedy do I need to balance out lung function?
Exactly. And that allows you to match the herb to the specific person and their specific symptom picture. And I can only tell you, as a clinician, The results you get treating people in this way is so far superior to the results you get when you treat a disease or a symptom, cough. That is a huge issue because, again, I cannot tell you how many people who, either treat themselves or go to somebody who's not familiar with these concepts, and then next thing you know, their lung condition is worse. You were talking about garlic. I mean, for people with like antibiotic resistant pneumonia, I can't tell you how many people I've seen. You take a clove of garlic, you mince it as fine as you can, you let it sit on your cutting board for about 5 or 10 minutes to convert the alliin into allicin. You then mix it in a carrier, and I highly recommend people eat something before you do this so it doesn't irritate your gastric mucosa. You can mix it in with pesto, you can mix it in with mashed potatoes, you can mix it in with unflavored yogurt. With flavored yogurt, it's gross. You mix it in with some kind of carrier and you consume that, and you do that maybe 3 times a day. There is no bacteria that I've ever come across that will stand up to this. I mean, the reality is you become offensive. No, I've people, you're taking enough raw garlic that if a vampire came into the room, they'd die simply from inhaling the air. But it is profoundly antibacterial. I mean, some people can't tolerate it. I get that. But I've seen people who are already on 2, 3 courses of antibiotics without any improvement. And this over a period of a few days, taking care of most of the issues that they're experiencing with that respiratory tract infection. So, I mean, something simple as that can be really, really incredibly useful. But energetics, again, allows us to match the specifics of the person and their case to the herbs. And when you do that and you do it well, you are going to be able to achieve results that you certainly aren't going to be able to achieve by sort of what we'll call cookbook herbal medicine, where, take herb A and herb B, mix them together. It's like those
well,
may not
well,
relate to
actually,
the person.
the thing about the cookbook, I think, is a really good analogy
Mhm.
because the difference between a cook and a chef is that the cook follows a recipe. The chef understands all the ingredients and how they blend together and how they interact. And he can taste the thing and say, oh, it needs a little of this or it needs a little of that to bring out the flavor or the profile he wants. And I think that's what a good herbalist is able to do. They're able to be the chef. They understand people and they understand their remedies, and they're sitting here trying to find the right mix to bring that person into balance.
Agreed.
Yeah. One of the things that I think that gets people confused and is difficult is that all of these models that are used, like you mentioned, TCM, the yin and yang, the idea of ki and the 5 elements, and all of those traditional systems of medicine have these kind of models,
Mhm.
is that people are in the West are used to thinking in terms of things as being very categorical, you know, and these are very metaphorical. They're teaching you to see a pattern,
Right.
not a specific symptom, but a pattern. Where I first began to understand that was I had read in Jethro Kloss's Back to Eden about white oak bark, and it was like bleeding gums, hemorrhoids, varicose veins. I thought, how can one herb treat so many different problems? But when I started to understand the idea that tissue can become lax, loose, and needs to be tightened up, I started to realize it's just the same problem in different parts of the body.
Yeah.
And that's where you really get a better understanding of how to use herbs effectively. So you did originally a talk on like 12 categories of herbs. You had the astringents and the pungents and the aromatics and everything, and that was really brilliant. And I've played around with that and made my own energetic models. So, but it really does help you understanding. And I like to think of it like if you're studying music,
Mhm.
you need to learn your scales. You need
Mhm.
to learn the music basics. Or if you're art, you need to learn how colors combine and how they contrast with each other and so forth. And as you start to learn those basics, then get a feel for the art of it.
Right.
Because now you can mix those colors in different ways to create a different piece. You can mix those musical notes together in different ways to make a piece. And I think it's the same way with herbalism. You learn your basics, of the energetics of people and how that matches up with what's going on in the body, and then you start to get creative with it. you start to think, oh, maybe this would work. And sometimes we are like, I don't know if you do this something, and I've never actually worked with this situation before, but listening to the person and trying to figure out what's going on, I get this idea like, you know what, I think this plant would be really helpful here.
I think intuition coming out of deep experience is a very powerful tool. I'm a little more leery of intuition coming out of ignorance.
Right. Yeah.
But intuition, there are times when I'll have somebody, a patient walk in, and as soon as I walk in, I'm already thinking, I want to give them this. And sometimes I'm not even sure where that's coming from.
Yeah.
But the thing that you were talking about, the class is called the 10 Tastes.
Yeah.
And what I did is I created my own system, having been trained in TCM, having a fairly reasonable understanding of Ayurveda, although I'm not trained in Ayurveda, also having some understanding of like Unani Tib, which is traditional Persian medicine, and all these other traditions, the eclectics, the physiomedicalists, who are also medical doctors, MDs who used herbs back in the 1800s and into the early 1900s. What I did is I sort of created my own synthesis of this, calling it the 10 tastes. In Chinese medicine, there are five flavors, five flavors. In Ayurveda, there's six. And what we think of as tastes or flavors, and many of them are actually like spicy, isn't actually a taste, it's a mouthfeel. But
Right.
this combines both what is actually a taste, where you have taste buds, there are five of those, plus the mouth feels into this system. Because if you really want to practice Chinese medicine, what you need to understand is you probably should learn Chinese, because there are so many things that get translated in English that are what are called a gloss, meaning this is as close as we can get, but that's not exactly what it means. I'd say the same thing's true of Ayurveda and Unani Tib and Kampo and Jamu from Indonesia. All these systems have a strong cultural basis, and you can practice it technically without understanding the deeper cultural basis, but I don't know if you'll ever become great at it. And so the idea was to create a system that Western herbalists could use, where you don't have to do a deep dive into another culture. And this is something that I teach this class. Like in my 2-year herb studies program, it's basically we do two classes and then they start working with it over a period. I mean, probably about 6 months of working with it and getting corrected on it. And you can see as the pieces start falling into place, and people are having those aha moments where they're like, oh, okay, I actually understand what I'm actually doing at this point. And I think of it as I'm not saying it's perfect. It's most certainly not, but I think it's a relatively easy to understand system that allows you to understand energetics. And again, matching it up to human energetics, or i.e. differential diagnosis, that allows you to use herbs with incredible skill and specificity, again, to the person and to the specific symptom picture that they are displaying. And again, when you talked about, TCM, in TCM, you've got two different actually systems that are used. You've got the 8 patterns, and then you've got the 5 elements. Most people today don't actually, there are certain schools in TCM that use the 5 elements. Most people actually use the 8 patterns much more commonly. In Ayurveda, you've got some people like Dr. Vasant Lad, who is a just exceptional teacher of Ayurvedic medicine. But I actually like a system that allows you, once you understand it, I can use herbs from Ayurveda, I can use Chinese herbs, I can use herbs from anywhere. It doesn't matter, as I understand energetics. And the easiest way to understand energetics is through the tastes. The taste and what it does in your mouth tells you whether it's heating or cooling or moistening or drying or nourishing. And once you understand that, you have the skill set now to be able to work with herbs wherever you are, understand their energetics, and understand how to match them to the person you want to help. And
And I
it's
think you made a point here that is really critical to stress. You're never going to understand this by swallowing herbs in capsules.
true.
You actually do have to taste the remedies and note they how they feel. You've got to get that subjective experience to translate the words into real understanding. And the other part of that is you really have to observe people.
Mhm.
You really have to learn to listen, to look, to see what's going on, and not just create boxes in your brain like this disease. You have to really just be willing to open up and see the person sitting in front of you and try to understand them. And when you take those two skills together, that really is what I think helps you develop that ability. Yeah, well, we'll put some links below to David's school and his company with herbs. But David, I've been honored to talk with you. It's just been an absolute pleasure. I love your approach. I've learned so much from you, and so thank you so much for taking the time to be with me.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. It's been a real pleasure to get the chance to talk and chat, and it's lovely, because we've known each other quite a long time, and in many ways we think very, very similarly. And I also want to just say how much I respect you and all the great work that you've done as well. So thank you for this opportunity.
You're welcome. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you, David. Hit the like button and subscribe to our channel to catch future episodes of Healthy Conversations. Help us educate others by sharing this video, and please feel free to share your own thoughts, comments, and questions below. To learn more, check out the links below.